What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you were listening to the Clemenz with a Z podcast. Now, this episode started in a way that a lot of things start with me these days. Not in a book, not in a study, not even in a conversation. It was just me scrolling. I came across this clip from this pastor of this huge megachurch out in Washington talking about the marriage bed, specifically about how kids shouldn't be sleeping in it. The message was pretty clear. It was confident and it was decisive. It's the kind of confidence that comes with phrases like, "This is how it should be. The marriage bed needs to be protected." And honestly, in a way, sure, I get the concern. I didn't immediately recoil. I mean, I was kind of like, oh, here we go. But I didn't shut down. And I was trying to understand what he was trying to safeguard. But then soon after that, I saw another reel. And it was a dad in a podcast talking about co sleeping and calling it a gift from God. So here we have a pastor and another guy, a dad, using same God language. Pretty sure this podcast was a Christian podcast and was the same ecosystem, but it was like two completely opposite conclusions. And the moment stopped me, not because I suddenly felt pressure to decide who was right, not because I needed to pick a team, but because of how certain both voices were. Two people invoking God, speaking with conviction about something deeply intimate, deeply human, deeply contextual, and arriving at totally different answers, which I honestly love when I find things like this. In that moment, something in me went like, wait, like, what are we actually doing here? Because when we speak so confidently about private family spaces, about beds, bodies, closeness, fear, comfort, it raises a bigger question for me than parenting advice. It raises the question of authority, of access, and of how quickly we turn personal convictions into universal truths. So that's where this episode really begins. Not with a debate about co sleeping, but with the whiplash of certainty and what it does to us when we're trying to just love the people closest to us. So before we go any further, I just want to be pretty clear, crystal clear about something. This isn't a co-sleeping episode. I'm not here to argue for it or against it. I'm not really here trying to give parenting advice. I'm not here trying to tell you what to do with your kids, your marriage, or your bed. Because if this episode turns into a debate about sleeping arrangements, then we're just falling into the same pattern that who's right, who's wrong, and we're going to miss the point that I'm trying to say entirely. What I'm interested in, and what I'm always interested in conversations like this, is what shows up underneath these conversations. What we reach for when someone we love is afraid, what we prioritize when things get inconvenient, and how quickly we confuse certainty with wisdom. Oh, I love saying that, confusing certainty with wisdom. If you've been listening to me for a while, I say that a lot. Also, when a child wakes up in the middle of the night scared, that moment isn't theoretical. It's not about strategy. It's not about principles. It's a nervous system moment. And it's a vulnerability moment. And the response to that moment, whatever it is, teaches something long before a child understands words. So, no, this isn't about where kids sleep. It's about access. Who has access to us, when, and under what conditions? And what that access or lack of it communicates about belonging, safety, and love to the people that matter to us most. And I keep thinking about that reel that I saw from a dad who was talking about co sleeping. And he told a story in that about this one night where his kid came into their room. It was like, I don't know, he said like 2 o'clock in the morning or something really late. He said the kid didn't just crawl into his bed, he opened the door and he was holding like a basket of his Hot Wheels. And he was holding the Hot Wheels because he wanted to let his dad know that if he could come in If he could sleep with them tonight, that he would let his dad play with some of his cars. And for me, that image wrecked me, wrecked me like hard, because that's not about sleep for the kid. That's about access. It's about a kid trying to figure out if closeness has a cost, if comfort has to be earned, and if being scared is enough, or if he needs to offer something in return. So that's what I mean when I say these moments teach something long before kids understand our words, because they're learning how the world works, how relationships work, how love works. So, no, this isn't a co sleeping episode. It's again about an episode about what we teach people when they come to us vulnerable and aren't sure if they're even allowed to be there. So, my philosophy of all of this access that my kids have to me wasn't just a philosophy. It just kind of started the first night that my kid was born. That night that my kid was between me and my wife, this tiny, fragile human, brand new to the world. And I can remember lying there, exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely undone, and thinking that this is it. Not a belief system, not a framework, not a role I needed to perform, just this. These two were my world. I didn't think about boundaries. I didn't think about hierarchy. I didn't think about protecting anything from him. I didn't feel like something sacred was being threatened. It felt like something sacred had arrived. My world didn't get bigger that night. It got smaller and clearer. And I know a lot of us feel that way, parents. Everything that mattered was right there. And that's important, I believe, to say out loud, because when I hear people speak with such certainty about beds and boundaries, I think back to that moment. That closeness didn't weaken my marriage. It didn't compete with intimacy. It didn't blur lines or create disorder. It oriented me. It taught me where my attention belonged and what responsibility felt like and what love actually asked of me. That night taught me that something before I ever had words for it, that love doesn't need to be protected from children, that love expands to make room for them. And when I felt that, and I know if you felt that, not as an idea, but in your body, it's hard to believe that closeness is anything that we need to fear. And so that night planted something in me that I didn't have language for yet, and I know now what it was. It's access. From the beginning, I wanted my kid to know that they've had access to me, not just physically, emotionally, relationally, access with fear, access with questions, access with anxiety, access with the good and the bad, especially the bad, especially moments that don't make sense yet. Because what a kid is really asking for in these moments when they're coming into the room at night or they're scared or anything, it's not permission to break a rule. In a way, they're asking deeper questions. Am I safe here? Am I allowed to need you? Do I still belong when I'm scared, inconvenient, or unsure? And I don't want my child learning at 2 o'clock in the morning in the dark that access to the people that they love is conditional, that they need to calm down first, that they need to self regulate alone, that they need to be brave before they're comforted. All of that feels backwards to me. Because for me, access isn't the opposite of boundaries, it's the foundation that boundaries are built on. Because boundaries without relationship don't feel like wisdom to a child, it's distance. And distance gets internalized long before it's understood. I want my kid to grow up knowing this deep in their body, that I can come to my parents, I don't have to earn closeness, and my fear doesn't disqualify me. Now, that doesn't mean that my kid will never hear no. It doesn't mean that there won't be limits. It doesn't mean everything is allowed. It means access is there. It's before, and there's presence before principle and connection before correction. And I believe that once that foundation is there, everything else, boundaries, independence, resilience, can actually grow. And I also want to say this here, because if I don't, this whole episode gets dishonest. And I know some of you are probably thinking this now, like, come on. Every time it's just great and wonderful when your kid comes into the bed. No, there are nights when my kid is sleeping in our bed completely sideways, like fully perpendicular. I don't get the head, I get the feet. There's feet in my ribs, in my back, and I'm tired, and I'm frustrated, and I'm not comfortable, and my body hurts, and it sucks sometimes. It's hard. And yeah, sometimes I even just leave the bed, not as a statement or a lesson, not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because I'm freaking human. Because this access doesn't always feel warm and magical. Sometimes it is cramped, it's inconvenient, and it's exhausting. And it matters to say that out loud because I'm not trying to pretend that closeness is easy. It's about choosing presence even when it costs something and knowing when to adjust. And I do want to be really clear here because nuance matters, because I do understand the conversations about boundaries in the bedroom. And I understand that there are marriages where intimacy is strained. I understand that sometimes kids in the bed are a symptom of something else that's already going on. And those things I just do believe deserve real attention, honest conversation, care, not denial. But what I struggle with is just how quickly real situational challenges get turned into these universal rules, like how a possible problem becomes a blanket prescription, how discernment gets replaced with certainty, and how complexity gets flattened into quote unquote, this is how it should be. Because not every marriage is the same. Not every child is the same, and not every season is the same. And wisdom that can't adapt to these things isn't wisdom, it's just control. And it comes back for me to how decisions are made. Because I think seeking advice is good. I think learning from others is good. I listen to podcasts, I read, I pay attention, but there's a line, and I think a lot of us know exactly where it is because at some point, seeking wisdom just turns into farming out responsibility. And when that happens, are we really parenting? Or are we letting other people, pastors, influencers, frameworks, reels, parent for us? For me, my wife, it's something that we've tried to talk through together. We take things in. We hold them loosely. We talk, we disagree, we adjust. We try to create boundaries that make sense for our marriage, our kid, and our life. Not because someone told us to, but because we're paying attention. And that feels important to say because the goal isn't to get it quote unquote right. The goal for us is to stay present. And presence is rarely ever clean, rarely confident, and rarely Instagram ready. But it's honest. And honesty is what actually builds trust. And I think this is the part that keeps sticking in my throat. It's that idea that there is one godly way to parent, one right approach, one biblical model, one correct set of decisions that, if followed closely enough, will keep everything aligned and safe. It's what I grew up in the ICOC, in my churches. I know a lot of us in these evangelical spaces grew up with the same thing, but I don't see that in the Bible. I don't see sleep arrangements. I don't see parenting flowcharts. I don't see family systems mapped out in scripture. What I see are values, stories, wisdom held in tension, and people making decisions in real time in real families and in real contexts. And yet we talk about parenting with this level of conviction that scripture itself doesn't claim. Pastors say things and we say things like, this is how it should be. This is God's design. This protects what matters. And the problem isn't the conviction. The problem is false certainty. Because when certainty replaces discernment, parenting stops being relational and starts being performative. We're no longer asking, what does my child need right now? What does our marriage need in this season? What helps us stay connected? We're asking, what's the right answer? What's the approved method? And what keeps us from being judged? And that shift matters because the more we outsource discernment to systems and slogans, the less we're going to trust ourselves and the partners in our lives. And so, like, here's the thing that feels both simple and radical to say out loud, because it's going to sound counterintuitive to everything that I just said. But I actually think there is one right way to parent. It might be confusing. Just roll with me, okay? It's not about where kids sleep. It's not about the techniques. It's not about the rules. The one right way is when parents are working together, communicating, listening, disagreeing, adjusting, figuring out together the kind of marriage, family, and life they want to build. That process, that collaboration, that shared responsibility, that feels far more godly to me than any rigid prescription because God isn't found in a formula, God is found in relationship. And when we confuse certainty for faithfulness, we're not going to become better parents. We're just going to become compliant ones. And so there's this one thing that I can't shake and that I've learned in my years with teaching and working with kids is that kids are learning long before they can explain anything back to us. You know, they're learning when they're half asleep, when they're scared, when they're embarrassed, when they don't know how to ask for what they need yet. They're learning what happens when they come to us vulnerable. Do we open the door? Do we tighten the rules? Do we quote a principle? Do we send them back alone? And whatever happens in those moments becomes part of their inner map. It becomes their reality. It becomes their story. Not because we meant it to, not because we were careless, but because that's how humans learn safety. A child who knows they have access, they don't grow up entitled. They grow up secure. They grow up knowing I can ask questions, I can name fear, and I can bring the hard stuff here, and I won't lose connection for needing comfort. And I think about, you know, there's this, it was the doula that helped my wife during her pregnancy. And she told us this story that when her kids were little, that she would let them crawl into bed whenever they wanted to, whenever they needed to. And she told us about how as they grew up and as, I think a couple of them were in high school, that they always came to her with questions and concerns. And she linked her kids' like openness with her to the openness that she had with them so early on. And so when I think about that story, and I think it matters to what I'm saying here, I think what stood out to me, it wasn't obedience, it wasn't discipline, it was control. It was how her kids showed up later, in high school with questions, with doubts, with real concerns, and they came to her. And I don't believe that that was accidental. And I don't think it was about sleep or a pattern. I think what was set up there is the idea that you're welcome here. You don't have to earn access. You don't disappear when things get hard. That was amazing. And I think when you have that, I don't believe that boundaries disappear. I don't think it means that parents stop being parents, and I don't think it means kids can never learn independence. I believe that it means independence grows out of safety, not the other way around. And when we miss that, we risk teaching something that we never intended, that closeness is fragile, that love is conditional, and that comfort has rules attached to it. So maybe the question isn't whether kids should sleep in the bed. Maybe we should ask a different question, better ones. Maybe the question is this: what do our kids learn from us and about their place in the world when they come to us afraid? Do they learn that they're a problem to be managed or a person to be held? I don't know. And honestly, I don't have a conclusion that ties all of this up neatly. I don't have a rule to offer or a framework to hand you. I'm not interested in giving you a takeaway that you can post on a slide, really. What I keep coming back to is a couple of things. Well, the first thing is that parenting, the right way to parent is when the parents are communicating with each other and figuring out what they need themselves. With help, with advice, yeah. But, but parenting with communication, with conversations, with all of that. The other thing I think is that access changes people. Whether or not you have it, it changes how we see ourselves. It changes how safe we feel in the world. And it changes whether we bring our questions out into the open or keep them hidden. I think that's true far beyond parenting. It's true in marriages and friendships and churches, in the way we see and imagine God. So maybe the invitation here isn't to decide where kids should sleep. Maybe it's to slow down and ask ourselves this: where have I made access conditional? Who learned that closeness has a cost? And what did I learn about belonging when I was afraid? Because the answers to those questions shape us, whether we notice them or not. And maybe faith, parenting at its healthiest, isn't about getting the rules right. It's about staying open, staying present, staying willing to make room, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs us something, even when we're tired, especially then. So thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clemens with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or send me a DM over at Instagram at the Clemens with a Z podcast Instagram page. You can support the podcast financially if you would like. You can head over to clemenswithaz.com. There's a merch store with shirts, stickers, all kinds of stuff. You can also donate directly through a GoFundMe that I've set up. The link is in the show notes. Every bit goes a long way in helping keep these conversations going. And if you're looking for something a little bit more regular too, you can check out my Substack, Devotions for the Disillusioned and Deconstructing. It's where I share short reflections, devotionals, and some extra stuff that don't always make it to the podcast. And of course, the best way you can support the show is by subscribing, rating, leaving a review wherever you listen to these things. Share it with a friend, post it on your socials, or drop it in a group chat. It all helps more than you know. This podcast keeps going because of y'all showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thanks for being here, for listening, and being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Peace.